Our next guest is Brooke, head of AI FDEs. And I think this will be a very interesting conversation because of AI and agents is a pretty hot topic, I think we can say.
A little bit.
To put it mildly. So can you talk a little bit about like what you do and which part of the Databricks ecosystem you see?
Yeah, so I lead our AI FD team, and our mission for the team is to focus on first of its kind AI applications or AI problems for our customers. So our goal is to solve business problems with AI, and in the process also improve the product. So we work very closely with our R&D team to improve our AI offerings.
Oh, so I think you have a very, very good view of what's happening at the cutting edge. Mm-hmm. And what do you see, like what is a typical project which you consider cutting edge today?
Ooh, I don't know if I would say typical. Every customer comes to us with such unique use cases. Some of the interesting ones have been audio generation as an example of transforming audio tracks from one artist into a different style. So taking a country song into the style of pop music, and those bring unique challenges of how do you do evals on that. There isn't an objective measure of what is a good sounding song. What sounds good to you versus what sounds good to me could have very different outcomes. We actually have Fox Sports over in the booth right behind us, and that's a great public reference of an example use case that we worked on with them. So we had helped co-develop the Fox Sports AI application with them.
So that's something actually anyone can try and see what's possible.
Exactly. If you have the US App Store, I will caveat with that, it's only available in the US App Store, but if you download the app, you can ask questions about your favorite sports teams, rankings, banter for friends. It even has speech-to-speech capabilities, so it will respond back in the voice of one of the Fox Sports broadcasters. That's an example of building at the cutting edge of a B2C application with one of our customers, doing something truly first of its kind for media accounts.
And what do you see, so when we talk about AI, it's a very broad term for head of data, someone whose mandate is to extend the adaptation of AI. So some people think about just chatbots giving access to Claude, some people think about agents, people think about business processes. What do you see or how do you think about AI and agents in an organization?
For me, it's all about improving productivity or building something that you couldn't have built before.
Okay.
So for example, with this Fox Sports chat application, you wouldn't have been able to build it without AI. Other applications, for example, the audio generation, you could always manually adopt songs from one style to another, but that's time intensive to be able to do. So I think about it both from a productivity and process improvement perspective, but then also the novel applications that are truly first of its kind.
What kind of challenges or blockers do you most often see? So where are the more the difficulties in any project or initiatives with AI?
The first one's always data. Having the right data in place, the right governance in place, data quality. Provided you have all of that, the number one area that we see customers start to go off the tracks is not having evals in place. And so too many customers, it's very easy to vibe code something. If you can build an application in an afternoon that actually looks quite pretty, but how do you know that it will perform well when you scale it out to your broader user groups of, if you ask a question of what was my revenue for fiscal year 2025, you want to ensure that you're consistently getting the correct answers, not just getting it one time, but consistently getting it correct. What fiscal year means for you is something different than what fiscal year means for Databricks, where it starts February 1st. Microsoft's, I think, starts July 1st. And so it's grounding it in that context and having the evals to ensure that when there are new models that come out, when you do any changes, it's kind of like whack-a-mole. If you fix one thing, it's possible you've accidentally broken something else. And evals are what helps ground that. And so we always advise to customers of treat evals like going to the gym. It's not something you do one time. It's something that you need to build a habit of. And every week, as you get new feedback from your users, you continually add an increment to your eval data set, so it continues to grow and expand over time. But I'd say that's the number one mistake that we see customers make when they're trying to adopt AI, is not thinking about being eval driven from the beginning. So it's kind of like test-driven development.
You actually nailed my question, because I wanted to say it's basically unit testing and integration testing for AI applications.
Exactly.
From the old TDD. And do you think that eval is a data science problem, a technical problem, or a business problem? Or who should be the person who says, okay, I'm gonna drive this eval initiative for my org? Or a project?
It always has the business involved. We want to make sure that we're answering questions that the business actually cares about. but it'll typically be in conjunction with, for example, an AI engineer.
Okay.
To understand of what are the questions that would be trivial for the model to answer? What are the questions that require, for example, aggregating information across multiple documents combined with web search? Those are the questions that are going to be much more challenging. And so breaking it down into like, what are table stakes questions that you should ensure you get every right. What are the aspirational ones? And really just making sure you have good representation across your eval data sets. We see some customers where it will be very limited and they think they can just swap one term for another. Like, what was the revenue for fiscal year 2025? Yeah. Then they think they can ask another question like, what was the revenue for fiscal year 2024? Those are two different eval questions.
Okay. So almost like a resolution that they need to gain, like how many questions, what type of questions covers the, I don't know, 90% or?
Yeah, and this is where sometimes AI engineers might try to do too much solo. If you can generate synthetic question and answer pairs based off of a corpus of documents. But what that doesn't answer is times where there's actually no answer provided the documents. So you'll never get that situation of, I'm going to generate a question from this document, but the answer actually isn't in the document.
Okay.
So being able to handle out of bounds questions you can't get from the synthetic questions. They can also typically be a bit overly simplistic, just withdrawing from one piece of context as opposed to needing to aggregate across multiple documents, or even more challenging where if you have multiple contracts, as an example, where there will be subsequent contracts that invalidate prior portions of contracts. And that's where that's where having the evals just grounds everything.
And do you have a guideline if, like, how many questions, how much time usually goes into that? Because I think this is somewhat new for most people, and they might struggle to understand, okay, but is this 80% of my job? Is this 10% of the project? So do you have any guidelines on that?
Yeah. Even just starting with 10 questions is really helpful. Yeah, so like you can start small. You don't need hundreds of eval questions to bootstrap it. You can gradually add them over time, but just getting the representative questions at the beginning really gives you a lot of information about what are you trying to build. For example, if you have a bunch of questions, let's say about revenue data, and suddenly you start asking about bookings data, but that actually isn't in the system at all, then you know, hey, actually we need to have an upstream data pipeline to be able to ingest the bookings data. So it gives you a lot of information about how users are planning to be using the system. We've often found it to be really helpful to do like half-a-day workshop with the SMEs. The biggest bottleneck is getting SME time, because typically you're building these AI applications because SMEs are so time constrained and they're the bottleneck. And so it is challenging to ask them to go above and beyond of like, hey, we know you're really busy, but can you give us a half day of your time to help us build the system, which will eventually make you more productive? But we just found getting everybody in the room for a half day. We actually have a judge builder workshop, which guides, guides people through how do you create evals in the first place. And that's how when new models come out, like it's helpful having those model leaderboards as an example, but what you really care about is how it performs on your data. It's possible that the leaderboards could be reversed when you apply it on your enterprise data. And so that's where having your own evals is the most important.
I love that you in those judging workshops use SMEs, but I assume the business is also involved, right? Because they have the answer.
Or they're able to get the answer, and that's also where you can highlight, hey, these are questions that the model struggled with. And it's important to know if it was yes or not, but if it was incorrect, what part of it was incorrect? Did it round to the wrong decimal point? Did it completely grab the wrong document? And that's where that SME knowledge is just invaluable.
And I think it's really good because it also educates the business on how the model works, what are the questions it struggles, because often they are treated like omnipotent, they know everything kind of things, but it's the reality is often a bit different.
And it also helps to build trust as well, the SMEs, where they're, sorry if I'm stealing all your questions.
Yeah, so good, because actually I wanted to say that. I'll continue.
Because it builds trust with the SMEs if they feel like they're part of this system.
Yeah, okay.
And like we've seen this time and time again with medical doctors, for example, if they don't care if an AI system can predict cancer or whatever disease with a better accuracy than they can, if it's a black box to them. And so if they're involved as part of the system design and they understand, hey, these are the evals that it was run on, these are what I contributed to, it just helps build so much trust with the downstream adoption. So really building up those champions as part of it. Just getting their time is honestly the hardest part.
Yeah, you nailed it, because my question would have been is evals one answer to trust? And you answered it, but you answered even more, because what I get is it's not just the evals, but also just including them in the process, and through educating them, that builds them the trust.
Exactly. And what we found to work really well is to work with a small group of highly invested individuals, as opposed to sending an email out to 200 people asking, hey, is anybody willing to contribute? Work with like 10 focused people where they have SLAs on getting back to you. Hey, if you have questions, they get back to you in 24 hours to really keep that highly iterative type process.
Yeah. And do you think that we who are coming more from the technical side should drive the business side selection, which process they should first start, or how should they think about AI? Because often to have a really good result, which is everyone looking for, you need to have the technical things like the data you mentioned, but you also need to select the right use cases. So how do you think about that, maybe the interface or maybe the process, like, if you have any similar advice that you mentioned in the judge workshop that's super practical. So how do you think about selecting the right use case?
So that's always a conversation with the business. So we always start with, what are your top priorities?
Yeah.
And they should typically be able to rattle off their top 3.
Okay.
And then it's a question of level of effort. It's a question of data availability, and it's a question of risk. Their top use case actually might be very challenging if they want to be able to search over all employee inboxes as an example and generate responses and answer questions based off of that. That can be challenging to ensure you have the right governance in place to make sure, like, I can't read your emails, but there are certain folks that are able to aggregate that information.
Yeah.
And so we typically will try to focus on one of the top 3 priorities to really lay the groundwork for the overall AI framework that can then be applied to subsequent use cases. So it's always a conversation of their top use case might take a year to build out. Their second one could be much simpler, 2 months, and drive massive ROI.
Yeah. And I think it's also a learning process for a lot of folks out there, because it's just new. And if you think about the platform itself, now there are so many. I mean, obviously it's hard to miss that most of the announcements were around agents, AI. So how do you think the different levels, like Omnigent is one example, where it's maybe more for the developers, and Agentbricks is a little bit above that. So how do you, in your mind, what is the structuring, or what's your mental model about the agentic capabilities of the platform?
Yes, excellent question. And it's very challenging because, like, day to day, there's continually new models that get released. What is state of the art? There's new techniques. Agentbricks is now our general term for our AI platform at Databricks.
Okay.
There are Agentbricks within Agentbricks, so it is a little bit confusing.
Yeah.
Kind of these low-code solutions.
Yeah.
Omnigent can connect to any of them via MCP as well too. So Omnigent is this meta harness. Yeah. And so you're able to set policies, able to quickly switch between coding agents as an example. Our team does this a lot with red teaming we'll use Claude Code and Codex as an example. And so, like, there's the Debbie personality that was released with Omnigent. But what I actually find more impactful about Omnigent is being able to set policies at the sub-agent level of, I will grant you authorization to draft an email, but I won't grant you authorization to send an email. Because that's really hard to do, especially as you're working with so many different models of having having just system prompts that isn't going to cut it. You really do need these policies in place for them to be enforced.
Yeah, especially when I had some cases where in the contracts there were some rules, but then the rules were somehow not respected in.
Exactly, There's that great example of a company where, like, Claude wiped out their company database in 9 seconds. That just invalidated all of the instructions given. So that's where policy is super important, and being able to also do the cost management side of things, proactive alerting. You hear all about token maxing of organizations that just had the mandate of use AI, but they're not thinking about how to use AI productively. Yeah,
and then I have 2 questions, but let's come back to Omnigent first, because you mentioned that how you red teaming, and for me it was fascinating that I see a lot of people now just getting used to let's say Claude Code or Codex, and understanding what's the difference between a model and a harness, and like where the value comes from, like what's more important, a better model or a better harness. But now as I hear you, you're not using one harness, you use the meta harness.
Yes.
So can you describe like how you use these tools, like in a typical technical task?
Yeah, so I mean, for example, we have an app that we use to manage our team's day-to-day processes. And I guess probably the best example is, I as an engineer, I have a way of how I would build out something. If you were to look at my code, you would have ideas as to how this could be improved. And so it's the same thing with red teaming between Claude Code and Codex as an example. They were trained on different data sets, they were trained differently of, like, via proprietary methods from their respective frontier labs.
Yeah.
And so if you have them go back and forth the same way you and I would go back and forth on a design, you end up with a net better solution in the end.
It's like peer programming with agents.
Exactly, exactly.
And do you see what's in a developer's work the next stage? So we have meta harnesses. So do you see people now really working on this meta layer, or do you see something already coming up, a different technique? I don't want to go and say the meta harness, but what do you think coming in? Do you see anything?
I think the biggest shift for my team over the past couple of months is very few people are actually writing code themselves. They're instead spending a lot of time planning and describing what they are planning to execute.
Okay.
But the actual execution can truly be done by LLMs these days. And so it's really spending the time thinking about what to build and not actually into the implementation details. And now there's PR reviewer skills as an example.
Yeah.
So if you were to ask me for a review of your code, I wouldn't do the first pass. I would have, for example, Claude do the first pass of your code, and then I would review after that to just make sure any of the basic hygiene is taken care of.
I think a lot of concern comes from people who are used to the old world where the person was responsible for the code by manually checking, going through and doing a typical pull request review.
Yep.
How do you see what are the control points and the techniques that makes you confident that when you work on something and you finish it up and you only did the first few things with the agents. So what are the control points that makes you confident in your work?
To be able to commit any code, having 2 reviewers.
Yeah.
So there's still team members that need to review and sign off on that code.
Yeah.
It's in a better state than it would be if I just filed a PR directly.
Yeah. So you still review the code, right?
Absolutely.
You did not let go.
Yes.
It's just things are faster because of the pre-work that the agents done.
Exactly. Both the development of the feature and then the pre-review of that feature.
All right. And how do you think a company should start using this technique? Like, okay, you mentioned the policies, for instance, which is very important. Budgets, I assume.
Yes.
But is there anything? So what would be like a checklist if I say, okay, my engineering org will use the similar techniques. What are the things I should cover?
Ooh. My first thought is actually getting the data governance in place.
Data governance. Okay.
Yeah, because I think that's one of the biggest challenges when companies are like, go use AI. Everybody uses Claude Code as an example.
Yeah.
And everybody's building 10 mediocre implementations of the exact same tool.
Okay.
And so it's thinking about what are the things that you want to be centralizing so you have central source of truth, for example, like a Genie agent that anybody can connect to.
Okay.
And that when you trust that if you ask questions about your revenue, you all get the same correct answers pulling from the correct data sources. Other things, for example, like helping me edit or summarize a doc, that's something that's like a personal skill.
Yeah.
Or putting things in a slide template. And so it's really thinking through what are the things that you want to centralize, and you have a team that's committed to driving the consistency and the quality of the centralization versus what are the things that it's totally fine if everybody just builds their own bespoke skills for. But that's how we see a lot of redundant work and a lot of people building things where they're getting multiple different answers because they're not all working off of the same source of truth.
It's actually a funny story. Someone told me this week that they use, now writing code became so easy, a lot of people just start building stuff, even things that might not have been worth building actually,
Exactly.
because the friction.
The P2s.
Yeah. And so everyone builds their own vouchers, their own dashboards, their own things. And one of the things I was wondering is, we actually ran an experiment where we gave a $20 and a $100 subscription to 2 people. Originally, it was two $20 subscription, but one person finished the job with those quotas. The other person could not finish even after increasing. So clearly, there is some kind of token efficiency with some people because they probably use it better. So, but I was wondering, like, would you measure the token efficiency? Because it's some new measure that we've not met before.
I actually don't monitor the token consumption for my team because I don't want people to try to game the leaderboard of, hey, we're adopting AI the most, and they try to be at the top of the leaderboard. I just made sure a few months ago, like everybody was non-zero. That was my bar of everybody's using AI on the team, but it will show up in deadlines of like who's hitting their deadlines, who has the quality and the user acceptance criteria, because if they're more AI driven, they're more likely to be finishing ahead of time, they're more likely to be building the right product at the first place. By, for example, vibe coding a solution or a quick prototype in an afternoon, make sure like this is the end user experience that we want. for this application. They toss the code and then they actually build out the right, like across dev, staging, prod, the right data pipelines, et cetera. But it allows us to iterate more quickly. So I don't monitor token usage for my team. I know that's a bit controversial, but I think that does significantly help with avoiding token maxing, actually.
Yeah, but you measure the outcome of that, right? So did you mention the acceptance?
And we do get alerts internally as an example of who's spinning up infrastructure that hasn't been used in the last 2 weeks. That's the kind of stuff I want to make sure we tear down. It's not about the tokens for what they're building.
All right. So last question, so what are you the most excited about in these last 2 days, the announcements, and maybe some of the announcements that were not in the keynote, but what makes you excited after the summit?
I think it's a tie between Lakehouse Realtime and all of the security announcements. With Lakehouse Realtime really being able to combine Lakebase and Lakehouse in one, not having to have near copies of data, discrepancies between the two. So like, to me, that's super exciting. But then also all the security investments of all of the time taken to be able to exploit a vulnerability, going from years to months to days to now hours. I'm both excited but also very nervous about all of the exploits that can happen, especially as people are vibe coding solutions. And so that's where actually the need for human reviewers was even more important. Because the reduced barrier to entry to be able to exploit exploits.
I think we'll need new ways of working, but I think these are coming.
And now we're chatting about having security checklists as an example before we release any code to customers. So there's a lot that we're thinking about now with just how easy it is for malicious actors to start attacking systems.
All right, thank you very much. It was super exciting, and thank you for all the insights of how you use. I think this is very, you're ahead of most organizations. So it's a very good example. So thank you.
I hope we are, so that way we can advise other organizations.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Máté.